Hello everyone. Today we are going to talk about something that is very, very interesting to me at least, and that is different cultivars. Now, if you don't know what a cultivar is, it actually means cultivated variety. There are many different varieties of coffee, but before we even get to varieties, we have to talk about different species of coffee. Because we do have probably among 120 to 130 different species of coffee. And a person that has been discovering a lot of these new species or old species is Aaron Davis at Kew Gardens in England. So check out his work if you want to learn more about that. The difference between two species can be the same as between pear and apple. For instance, if you have Robusta and Arabica, the difference can be like Robusta is a pear and Arabica is an apple, for instance. So although they are both coffee, they are different species of coffee. Now there are many, many different species, and not all of them are grown commercially. Some of them don't produce a lot of coffee, some produce a lot, some produce coffee that doesn't taste good, some produce coffee that is delicious. And the reason why we chose Arabica and Robusta to be the kind of species of choice is probably because they were easier to produce, shorter trees, and Robusta obviously produces a lot of coffee, but not high quality, and is often grown in lower altitudes. Whereas Arabica is grown at higher altitudes and can produce very interesting floral, fruity, or chocolatey, nutty coffees. So within the Arabica species kind of family or kingdom or whatever you would like to call it, there are many different cultivars or varieties of coffee. And I know Aaron Davis like to use the word cultivar because they are cultivated. As soon as they are on a farm, they're a cultivated variety. And this one, for instance, is an SL28 that is very, very common to grow in Kenya. And this one is a geisha that is quite common to grow in Panama, for instance. And they have very, very different flavors, not just because they're grown in different places, but because they are genetically different. Now you can also see on the trees that the geisha, the branches are growing like a Y, whereas on the SL28, the branches are growing more like a T. And so you can see the difference on the trees. Some are short, some are tall, some have big leaves, some have small leaves, some have big cherries, some have small cherries, some have yellow cherries, some have yellow and red cherries, some have pink cherries. So you can see the difference, and you can also taste the difference on these different cultivars. For instance, the SL28 cultivar, when I see that on a bag of coffee, I immediately will expect a very fruity coffee. And the fruit flavor would be more towards like red berries, black currants. But it's not always the case, because if the SL28 cultivar is grown in a lower altitude, for instance, it doesn't develop the same amount of intensity of flavor as if it's grown in Kenya, for instance, in high altitude, in cold climate. Then normally these SL28 cultivars develop a lot of intense fruity berry flavors. And it's the same with the geisha. When it's grown in the right conditions, it will give you a super floral, citrusy, lemony, tangerine, mandarin kind of flavors, sometimes honey, sometimes peach, but it's always very floral and intense and very delicate and aromatic. But if you grow it on low altitude, it will taste like chocolate and nuts and very generic. So some cultivars, they like lower altitude, some like higher altitude in order to get the best flavor. So what I do when I work with coffee producers around the world, we actually try to get seeds for them to plant so we can see which coffee tastes better at their farm. Because normally, for instance, in Colombia, most of the producers, they grow Castillo and Caturra and Variedad Colombia, because those are the seeds that are given to them by the local coffee federation. But if we can source coffees like Bourbon, Geisha, Pacamara, Java, other different cultivars, we can plant them on the farm and see, do they create unique flavors in that particular place? Because each and every cultivar needs slightly different conditions in order to really enjoy themselves and produce the best coffees. So that's how I work with the farmers a lot, and that's why we buy a lot of different coffees from each farm, because I like to have different kind of flavors from each farm, so that I don't have to travel to all different countries just to get different tasting coffees. So now you know a little bit more about what a coffee cultivar is. If you want to read a little bit more about it, check out the World Coffee Research webpage. They have a kind of a catalog of different Arabica cultivars. It's super interesting to read the history behind them, and how they produce coffee, if it's high quality, if it's low quality, if it's a lot of production or low production, and so on. So if you're into that, check out the World Coffee Research webpage.